Shalom, shalom, my Habarim. Greetings, my YouTube Mishpah. What's up, my people? And welcome, friends, to Bible on a Bicycle Supercuts Fan Edits.
An event, popularly known as the Roswell incident, has recently been the subject of intense interest by both the media and a curious general public. In recent years, numerous speculative books, magazine articles, television programs, a made-for-TV movie, 2 UFO museums, fraudulent documents, and even an alien autopsy film have emerged to exploit the media fascination with the Roswell incident. The story has even gained international attention. Despite the vested interest and questionable credibility of all sources involved in generating the media hype, the U.S. Air Force is routinely accused of concealing a deep, dark secret from the American people.
This is a first, so you'll be able to say at some point, I was there when Heiser did his session in Roswell on testing the Majestic documents. What you're going to see is something that has never been done before. I don't know why. It could have been done in the last 15 to 20 years, but no one has undertaken it. I may say a little bit about that as we go through. What you're really going to get is authentication, because I only got the test results in June. I sent these things off to a leader in the field and had to wait, just like some of you have had to wait weeks and weeks and weeks since you heard a little bit about this. I had to wait months to get the results back. And so I want to, of course, give you the results, but I also want to take you through the process. What did I do? What did I have done? What does it mean? A little bit of background, and so you know the significance of it. This is a good case of hard science being applied to UFO studies. Now, I've said many times before, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not a professional ufologist. I have a day job. I don't do this for a living. I don't need any money from it. Okay, I just want to know. And there are areas that I'm taught in, I'm trained in. I want to apply those to questions like, well, are the Majestic documents real or not? I mean, what can we say? What can be tested? That sort of thing. So that's what I did. I had no idea what to expect.
It's my personal belief, based on a fair amount of evidence, that they're not aliens. They've always been here.
I had one, I remember the conversation very well. This is a person I respected tremendously, very, very senior person. He told me, he said, Lou, I want you to stop doing this. I said, okay, sir, I certainly can, but may I ask why? And he says, well, we already know what it is. Now, at that moment, I honestly thought maybe it was our own technology. I was running up against some super uber secret sap, and they were telling me to stop. And I said, okay, sir, so it's ours? And he said, no, that's not what I'm saying. And he said, he asked me point blank, have you read your Bible lately? And I wasn't quite sure where he was going with that. And I said, well, sir, I think I know what it says. Where are you going with this? And he said, well, then you would know that these things are demonic and we should not be pursuing them.
Mr. Grush, why is it that you refer to the phenomenon as non-human intelligence? Why deviate from the basis of extraterrestrial life?
I think the phenomenon is very complex, and I like to leave an open mind analytically to specific origin.
When you say specific origin, are you can you elaborate on that for those that might not?
If it's a traditional extraterrestrial origin or something else that we don't quite understand from either a biological or astrophysics perspective, I just like to keep an open mind on what it could be,
These civilizations out in space are absolutely fed up with that. And let me be clear about this. This is a warning and it is a threat.
I'm talking about when I listen to the witnesses, and I try to listen very carefully to what people tell me. They are describing phenomena and objects that appear very often out of nowhere, disappear on the spot, objects that are changing shapes, objects that merge together, if the technology or the phenomenon can do that, what that tells me is that it is manipulating time and space dimensions in ways that are beyond our science. And if they can do that, they can be from anywhere, anytime. They don't have to be from a particular planet in outer space.
In early 1994, New Mexico Congressman Stephen Schiff requested the General Accounting Office initiate a records review. The purpose of this review was to determine if the U.S. Air Force or any other U.S. government agency possessed information on an alleged crash near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947 of an extraterrestrial vehicle and its alien crew. In response to the GAO probe, the Secretary of the Air Force directed a comprehensive search for records. The objective of this search was to tell the Congress and the American people what the Air Force knew about the 1947 Roswell claims. If the information was still classified, it was to be declassified. If active or former Air Force officials had signed non-disclosure agreements, they were to be released from these agreements. The resulting 800-page report was completed in July 1994. The report concluded that the predecessor to the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Army Air Forces, did recover material near Roswell in July 1947. What was recovered was not the remains of an extraterrestrial spacecraft and its alien crew, but debris from a then-classified Army Air Forces research project codenamed Mogul.
So with that said, let's jump in here. This is a basic outline of what we're going to be going over. There's going to be an introduction, an overview of the process, the sources for the documents, how they were selected, and they were selected according to the methods that, frankly, I could afford because this is self-funded. I'm going to be pitching you and pitching a very large audience on the 12th of July. I'm going to be a guest on Coast to Coast. And what I need to fund further research is I need to find 500 people who care. There ain't 500 people who care about this, and that will say something to me, and it will probably say something to the wider UFO community. I'm going to go through the results then and comment on them, and then talk about what could be done in the future. Now, the basic idea for this came to me when I was at the X Conference in 2005. It was during a lecture by Ryan Wood, and the Woods, Robert Wood, Dr. Robert Wood, and his son Ryan, who are most well known for their work on the Majestic documents, they are not connected with this study, this research at all. I don't even know if they know about it because it's really been under the radar. But I got an idea as I was listening to Ryan Wood, and he had the word stylometry on one of his PowerPoint slides. And being a biblical scholar, I knew what stylometry was, and I'm going to explain that to you today. And I thought, I wonder why they haven't done that, because he said we haven't done that. It's something he threw out there that could be done, and I thought about it for a while, and it just, one thing led to another. I got busy with my job. Around January, I thought, I should really do this. I think I can save enough money to get it done, so let's try it. And I did. Now, the need, of course, is that it's never been attempted, and I wanted to try to build on other testing. Here's what the Woods have done, and they've really put a lot of work, a lot of effort, and so has Stanton Friedman and some others, into this kind of testing. This is not what I had done. This has already been done before. This has limitations. They did things like physical dating of ink and pencil, and do the keys on certain typewriters of the period in which this document was supposed to be typed. Do they match the typeface on the document? What about the ink, its composition? Dating formula, how the sort of outline method or the salutation method that was used in the document, does that jive with similar styles that were used in the period? So it was sort of a chronological testing. They did testing on watermarks, chemical composition of the paper. Again, these are physical tests. Comparison with known events, handwriting they've done a little bit with, the stamps on certain Majestic documents, are they consistent with stamps used in the period, that sort of thing. All that has been done. I did not want to reinvent the wheel. I think we should be thankful to the Woods that they've really put the effort into doing what they've done. But this surpasses what they've done in significant ways. Now, as far as a linguistic testing claim, some of you are thinking, well, I've read somewhere before that the Majestic documents have been tested by a linguist. Well, not really. Kind of, sort of, and frankly, no. Now, here's the quotation that you might be thinking. This is Stanton Friedman, and I don't mean this in any way negatively towards Stanton. He was honest. This is what he had done. We're going to talk a little bit about it. At the suggestion of attorney Bob Blechman, I had obtained 27 examples of Hillenkoetter's various writings from the Truman Library. He hands them to a linguist, and the guy was a linguist named Dr. Westcott. He reviewed these. What does that mean? He reviewed these and the EBD, the Eisenhower Briefing document, stated April 7, 1988, letter to Bob. In my opinion, there's no compelling reason to regard any of these communications as fraudulent or to believe that any of them were written by anyone other than Hillenkoetter himself. This statement holds for the controversial Presidential Briefing Memorandum of November 18, 1952, as well as for letters, both official and personal. End of quote. What Stanton Friedman did was he took some documents, handed them to a linguist, and said, hey, what do you think? Could they be real? And the guy says, really seen any reason they couldn't be. Problems with the claim. There's no proof that the linguist did any testing. There's none. I mean, where are the results? Where are the tests? Where's the data? Where are the reports? All that kind of thing. Computational methods were only invented in the 1980s. Okay? Dr. Westcott's specialty was anthropological linguistics. Did he ever even use a computer? He got his degree in the 40s. So he may not have ever even used a personal computer. We don't know that he actually did anything that would hold up in court or that would really qualify as stylometric analysis. We just don't know. There's no evidence that anything like this was ever done. And frankly, I'm sure that if it was done, we would have all heard about it because it would have been big news. Now, the last comment here, non-computational methods have been invalidated and they are not accepted as legal evidence. Where do I get that claim? I get that from the legal field. There's a whole history behind this, and I'm going to take a little sidebar here. The evolution of legal evidence standards for scientific evidence. Legal proceedings have long required some kind of authentication of documentary evidence. I mean, somebody writes something down, it becomes part of a court case, even if it's in the 1700s. It's still part of the evidence to decide the case, whatever the case concerns. Until the 19th century, a document was typically authenticated by an eyewitness to its creation. So if somebody watched this person write that letter, that was how you validated. And they didn't have the technology. This kind of document authentication is still admissible testimony under the Federal Rules of Evidence, Rule 901. But what if no such person is available or willing to testify in that regard? Which, of course, is the case with the Majestic material. In the early 19th century, another kind of document authentication came on the scene. Now, we're talking about the early 19th century, this is the 1800s, and that was comparison by an expert of the questioned document with known writing samples. In 1913, the U.S. Code permitted the admissibility of handwriting identification by expert testimony. So back in the 1800s, the state of the art was, okay, we have a document here, there's nobody living that can say, I saw that document written by the person whose name is on it. So they had experts in handwriting analysis come along, try to develop that field and say, yeah, I think this document was written by person X because I'm really familiar with his handwriting style, the physical style, the way the letters are formed and connected and all that sort of thing. So that was 1913. In 1923, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Frye v. United States that scientific testimony should be limited by its, quote, general acceptance within the scientific community. Question document examination was, in a sense, immune from such scrutiny, since any lawyer seeking to introduce it in court could argue that it was directly admissible by statute, the old Rule 901. That didn't set well with some people. In 1993, 70 years after Frye, the Frye case, the U.S. Supreme Court heard Daubert v. Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals Incorporated, which resulted in major changes in the way that expert testimony is admitted as scientific evidence. The court ruled, catch this is important, the court ruled that testimony, if it is to be considered scientific, must be demonstrated to have characteristics shared by established sciences like biology or chemistry. Well, what kind of characteristics? Well, the court ruling actually listed some. For us to accept your scientific argument as valid evidence in court, legally, your scientific stuff has to include empirical testing. You have to tell us the known or potential rate of error. You have to establish standard procedures for performing a technique. It has to be subject to peer review and publication in peer-reviewed publications. And there has to be some means of measurement, replication, which means other people have to duplicate it. If we're familiar with this, if your background is science, this is how science is done. 4 or 5 hypothesis, you do a test, you get a result. Is it replicable by someone else? Ideally, people around the world. If it's replicable by everybody using the same methods, it's like, wow, this must be correct. Well, they said you need to have replication here, and you need predictability. In a Daubert hearing, one held to determine whether evidence can be admitted as scientific, Professor Barry Scheck, who remembers Barry Scheck? The OJ trial. This was the guy that made a mess of the DNA evidence. Here he is again. Okay. Barry Scheck attacked question document examination on the basis of its scientific foundation. So Scheck was involved in a case where someone was trying to introduce scientific evidence related to analysis of a piece of writing. And Scheck did what Scheck apparently does really well. He muddied the waters, and he referred to the Daubert decision and said, look, this doesn't conform to the rules of scientific evidence. District Judge McKenna agreed. The Daubert hearing established that forensic document examination, which clothes itself with the trappings of science, does not rest on carefully articulated postulates. It does not employ rigorous methodology and has not convincingly documented the accuracy of its determinations. Now, what does that mean for our current topic? Well, it meant that document examination methods predating the current methods of testing. In other words, 1993 was when Daubert handed, this decision was applied. Anything prior to 1993 was going to get hammered in court because they're going to re-reference the whole Scheck thing, that whole decision, McKenna, the judge agreeing. So anything preceding that did not meet the rules for evidence. Document testing therefore faced an uphill battle in meeting the standards of evidence laid out in the Frye decision. New technology and methods were needed. Even if Dr. Westcott had actually done some sort of testing for Stanton Friedman, and there's no evidence that he did, the testing would not and could not meet the rules of legal evidence. It would just be worthless, unfortunately, but that's just the way it is. Wouldn't matter. So what's happened since? July 1996, 1 year after Daubert, the National Institute of Justice sponsored a workshop on how question document examination might develop principles and methods that would meet or exceed the Daubert criteria for scientific evidence. Dr. Carol Chasky, her name is in red for a reason. She is the computational linguist who I had test Majestic documents. She has been among the experts who have succeeded in creating processes that meet this standard. Okay, I was able to track Dr. Chasky down. She is a leader in the field. If you Google things like authorship attribution, stylometry, document authentication, and linguistics, her name's going to pop up. So I literally sent her an email after I was almost done typing everything in. I had some assistance from some Roswell residents here to do that, and said, hey, are you interested in this? And she said, yeah, I'm interested. Chasky, I just want to give you an idea. And what I'm concerned about is, do I have good people doing the work? Will their work stand up in court? Well, Dr. Chasky, this is her resume from the web. She has a PhD in linguistics from Brown University. Her doctoral work was actually dealt with her creation of the software that she now uses, sort of the guts of it. I mean, she's kept up with it and advanced it as part of the process to meet the legal standards of evidence. But she's been doing this a long time, and here's what stuck out to me about her. Examples of forensic linguistic consulting. Look at the list of court cases that her work has been used in and applied and held up in court. I'm still going. Okay, well, we're just got another page here. And we're still going. I think it's there we go. Now we're in another different area. Research. By the way, she is the only, her institute is the only body that does this kind of testing that has received federal grant money to do it. This is arguably the top person in the field. She's not going to blow it. Okay? Now, her methods in testing have held up in court. The Majestic documents have never been tested in such a scientific manner as they were these past months. And of course, this past month is when I got the results.
The way we get into trouble as scientists talking about UFOs is that we mix up three different levels. there is a physical level, there is a physiological level, which is what happens to people like you and me when you get close to one of those things in a close encounter situation. And then there is a belief level, the mythological or sociological level, if you want. On the physical level, what we know today is that UFOs are a lot of energy in a small space. I've just published a book called Confrontations, in which I've gone through the basic observations of the light and the energy from UFOs. What we know is that these objects represent probably the energy of a small nuclear plant in a small volume. And it's manifested in light, in microwaves, and in pulsed microwaves. Now, we don't know a lot about what pulsed microwaves do to the human brain. So I've spent a lot of time looking at the medical effects. For example, in 1988, I spent 2 weeks in Brazil, in the interior of Brazil, from Fortaleza to the Amazon, talking to people who had seen the beams, had been injured by beams from UFOs. And there is no question that there is a lot of concentrated energy that in a form that we don't understand. There is impact on the skin. They do describe a hot sensation, but the beam would also pin them down and push them. And we don't know how to make a beam that does that.
Okay, and referring to your News Nation interview, you had referenced specific treaties between governments. Article 3 of the Nuclear Arms Treaty with Russia identifies UAPs. It specifically mentioned of them. To your knowledge, are there safety measures in place with foreign governments or other superpowers to avoid an escalatory situation in the event that a UAP malevolent event occurs?
Yeah, you're referring to actual public treaty in the UN Register. It's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, the Agreement on Measures to Reduce the Risk of Outbreak of Nuclear War, signed in 1971. Unclassified treaty, publicly available. And if you cite the George Washington University National Security Archives, you will find the declassified in 2013 specific provisions in the specific red line flash message traffic with the specific codes pursuant to Article 3 and Article, also Situation 2, which is in the previously classified NSA archive. What I would recommend, and I tried to get access, but I got a wall of silence at the White House, was those specific incidents when those message traffic was used. I think some scholarship on that would open the door to a further investigation using those publicly available information.
Because we want to get the word out about these breaking developments as they evolve over this year, 2025. Everyone I'm speaking to in the U.S. government have indicated this is going to be the year of disclosure of all this coming out. It's going to start slowly and then pick up speed. There's just been the smallest tickling of that right now with some whistleblowers coming forward. There are a lot more in the wings. And then there are a number of activities that are to be determined depending on what the incoming Congress and administration will do. I've been told by many of these special forces guys who've been in these bases that there's a number of them still in captivity, which they euphemistically call, I like the wordage they use, this to sort of whitewash what's going on, refugees. Well, they're not refugees. They've been captured and they're prisoners of these aggressive military and corporate programs. So those need to be liberated, and we're working on that through a group of special forces guys.
And I do think it's spiritual, based on the evidence. I think
I'm with you.
But if the U.S. government has in fact had direct contact with these beings, whatever they are, I've already told you what I think they are, and has entered into some sort of agreement with them, which is the claim of informed people, I would say. Whether they're right or wrong, I can't say conclusively. If that is true, I mean, it's a very, very, very heavy thing.
Begun in 1946, Project Mogul was a top-secret attempt to acoustically detect suspected Soviet nuclear explosions and ballistic missile launches. The project was accorded the highest priority because it addressed the most important post-war national defense concern: development of an early warning system to prevent a devastating surprise attack. Mogul used an odd assortment of naval acoustical sensors, radar reflecting targets, nylon fibers, and other equipment carried aloft by a train of weather balloons extending over 600 feet. Claims that the U.S. Army Air Forces recovered a flying disc near Roswell in 1947 were based primarily on a misidentification of the radar targets, a standard element of weather equipment adapted for use on the long mogul balloon train.
There's just no better person to do it. So let's talk about what she did. Okay? What is authorship attribution, presuppositions, history, uses, and this thing we call stylometry? The discipline of authorship attribution is a way of determining who wrote a text when it is unclear who wrote it, or of ruling out the validity of some claim of authorship. So if I was involved in a court case and there was this document, I said, no, I didn't write that. Well, these kinds of testing methods would either prove 90% or better that, yep, Heiser wrote this, or no, there's just no way that he wrote it. But this guy over here that the defense is blaming, we tested his writing too. That's a dead ringer right there. So it can demonstrate who wrote something or who didn't write something. In a typical scenario, a set of documents with known authorship are used as a control sample. Through sophisticated computer technology, linguistic patterns are detected in an author's style. That's what we call stylometry. The linguistic patterns of the test document are then compared to the control data to see whether the linguistic patterns match. So if Dr. Chasky wanted to prove that I wrote something, again, with a high degree of probability, she would test lots of stuff that I've written that I don't dispute. Yep, I wrote this pile of stuff. She would just pour all that into her computer program. The computer would detect stylistic things that I do when I write. And then it would come up with a set of patterns that I have. And then she would run those patterns against the unknown, the disputed one, and ask the simple question, do they match? Now, the methods are based on certain presuppositions which have been confirmed by years of validation testing. For Dr. Chasky to meet the Daubert criteria for legal evidence standards and scientific standards, she had to be able to demonstrate that her processes work on known material. She gets the correct result, and she's been doing that for years. When authors write, they use certain words unconsciously. Each of us has habits that make his or her writing unique, a so-called linguistic fingerprint. The computer extracts features from a text that can distinguish one author from another, and through advances in machine learning and natural language processing, they make that extraction very sophisticated. Now, primitive methods for doing something like this before computers were around, but they were novel for their time. Go back to 1887. Mendenhall's work was followed by the work of a guy named Yule in 1938 and Morton in 1965, but they didn't have computers. Computational methods began in the 80s. Again, this is at the end of Dr. Westcott's career, again, the linguist that Stanton Friedman mentions. We don't even know if the guy ever used a computer. He was not a computational linguist, and he couldn't be because the methods were new. And before the mid-1990s, the methods were considered invalid in terms of holding up in court. Common contemporary uses. Where you might have heard of this before? Stylometry is used to analyze anonymous or disputed documents or books, such as plays of Shakespeare. Every once in a while, something will come along, and it's something that Shakespeare scholars aren't familiar with, but it has Shakespeare's name on it, or it looks like Shakespeare. So there's a website here, shakespeareauthorship.com, where you can see some of the methods used in that example. Plagiarism detection. Those of us who have taught really enjoy when we can nail somebody who plagiarizes. It's a lot of fun. The book Primary Colors. Anybody remember this? There was an anonymous book released that sounded an awful lot like Bill and Hillary Clinton when they were on the campaign trail. There was a dispute, and nobody knew who wrote it. Once they had a suspect, they called in a stylometrist, and they nailed them. And then the person fessed up. Yep, it was me. The Unabomber. Once the authorities believed that Ted Kaczynski was the Unabomber, they took material that he had written, put it through some stylometric programs, some software, extracted patterns, and ran them against the anonymous notes the Unabomber had written. Guess what? This is the guy. Forensic investigations also use this on, I don't want to unsettle anyone, but on emails, newsgroup messages. Our company actually just hired a guy who wanted to get out of the defense industry, who was a computational linguist. And his job before coming to our Bible software company was reading your email and designing the programs for things like Carnivore. He got tired of doing it. He thought this would be much more interesting. So we're glad to have him. He's glad to be out of it. Guess he has a conscience. Stylometry now. Again, the science of determining literary markers. What are some examples? Well, you can study the rarest, most striking features of a writer. That's not really the best thing to do because that can be faked. Let's say that I know I want to fake a document written by some guy who's a physicist. If I know a little bit about physics, that's good because I can do research and study physics books and pull out unique vocabulary that a physicist would use and put them in my document. Okay, unique vocabulary isn't a very good test. It's much harder when you can study patterns for how writers use words like and, to, but, prepositions and conjunctions. Believe it or not, when I write, I subconsciously use very, very common words in patterns. It would take a lifetime for someone to study my writings, and probably that person wouldn't have a life, to find out how I use if, how I use prepositions. But a computer can do that in a few minutes, a few seconds, depending on what you're looking for. While unusual vocabulary can be adapted or incorporated in faking, it's hard for anybody to do the opposite. Now, today, a stylometrist could do it. I mean, I could go hire a stylometrist to fake a Majestic document. Hey, go study FDR's stylistic patterns, and then let's write up a document that matches those patterns, and then let's go have another stylometrist test it and say, whoa, it's authentic. I mean, you can do that today, 2007. Couldn't do that in the 50s. Other style markers. Believe it or not, you have an average sentence length. Mine is very long. Average syllables per word. No comment. Average word length. Distribution of parts of speech. How do I use nouns, verbs, prepositions, and conjunctions in combination with each other? There's a pattern. Word frequencies. How often do I use certain words? How often do I use those little function words? Even punctuation. How often does Mike use a semicolon and where? That's impossible to fake. Syntactic patterns, larger sentence structures. No single test criterion is conclusive. This is an important point. But the combined results of all these factors, if you had a software program that could munge them all together, and then you take the patterns there and go to the unknown, then you'd have something. Guess what? That's what Dr. Chasky does. That's what her program does. This is a quote from Dr. Chasky in one of her published articles. My syntactic analysis method has obtained an accuracy rate of 95%. The primary difference between the syntactic analysis method and other computational stylometric methods is the syntactic method's linguistic blah, 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 blah. Who cares? 95%. Now, what I could afford, I had her cut some things out. So she would only say to me, I'm going to make that figure 90% for you because we didn't do everything that I could have done. And I said, okay, I'm willing to live with that. Maybe we can raise the money to do the whole 9 yards.
Thank you. And then my last question with 51 seconds remaining. You mentioned white-collar crimes potentially being taking place in regards to a cover-up. Can you please elaborate?
I have concerns based on the interviews I conducted under my official duties of potential violations of the federal acquisition regulations, the FAR.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I yield the remainder of my time.
These civilizations out in space are absolutely fed up with that. And let me be clear about this. This is a warning and it is a threat. If we stay on that path much longer, the dangers to peaceful civilizations out in space and other transdimensional space-based civilizations is that it is untenable. So we're at a crisis and we have to fix it. And the way we're going to fix it is to stand down completely those aggressive weapon systems. Now, one of the executive orders that I have recommended to the incoming president and the Congress is an immediate cessation of the use of those systems that target, bring down these craft through a forced effort as opposed to peaceful contact. So we need to take that sword and all those tools they have, but turn it into this plowshare of open, peaceful contact without the ulterior, selfish motive of let's steal and reverse engineer more of their tech. We've already done that. It's been done for 70, 80 years. We don't need to recreate that wheel. We need to disclose the technologies that already are existing, that are to be used peacefully, not the things that fly, but the energy generation. But we don't need to go from one legacy program to something that would be equally misguided and would be using technologies that are psi-related aggressively or in a way that is forced.
I said before, we don't know too much about what happens to the human brain when you're in a situation where pulse microwaves are in your environment. It's possible that people who get close to a real UFO go into an altered state in which their perceptions can be manipulated. And what is critical there is to be able to retrieve the memory from those witnesses. And that memory very often is erased or is not available to them, or may be replaced by hallucinatory or delusionary material. So my problem with the whole abduction, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, my problem with the whole way abductions are studied is that the hypnosis, very often hypnosis is used by people who are not trained to do that. And I would caution anyone in your audience who has had an abduction experience only to seek counsel from people who are trained as clinical hypnotists or as MDs in the use of hypnosis.
But hypnosis by itself is a useful tool.
Yes, but it's not necessarily going to give you the truth. And I think you have to look at the standards for the admissibility of hypnosis in court, for example, to find what the pitfalls are, because it's very easy to influence people with your own belief. A person under hypnosis will easily pick up what your own beliefs are and what you expect them to say. And they will lead you, consciously or unconsciously, they lead the witness to say certain things. And I have a lot of trouble with that. I think it is unethical, and I think it's not going to get us to the truth.
You said it is that something really is going on.
Yes.
But is it what they're describing, abducted by strange beings, that kind of a thing, or is it all psychological?
I don't think it's all psychological. The beings have been described also by people who were not abducted, in quotes, by people who were at some distance. I just spent a week in the Soviet Union talking to research groups there, especially about the Voronezh case, in which dozens of witnesses, not just kids, but also adults, have seen different kinds of beings.
In June 1947, the oddly constructed radar targets were found by a local rancher who later reported the equipment as a flying disc. Following some initial confusion at Roswell Army Airfield, the flying disc debris, aluminum foil, rubber, paper, and sticks, was identified by Army Air Force officials as remnants of radar targets and weather balloons. With the positive identification by the Army Air Forces of the debris recovered by the rancher, events that occurred in 1947 were officially resolved and largely forgotten.
Let's talk about the documents, get into the actual tests. The Majestic documents are, of course, widely available, most notably on the Woods site, but of course other sources on the internet and in print. The documents tested were taken from internet websites or again in print. I got a variety of sources here. And I typed them by hand into usable electronic form, TXT file. And Free and Amy here in Roswell, who were running the conference, helped me finish that up so I could get the testing done in time. That's all we did. We had, by the way, I should say, I was interested in the text. I didn't worry about headings. I didn't worry about stamps on documents. All we were interested in retyping and testing was, what did the person write? All the sentences, all the paragraphs, that kind of thing. Documents that bore a specific author name were selected. The reason that we had to do it this way is because a Majestic document had to have a name on it. It had to have a claimed author so that I could go collect the control samples. Let's say there's a memo here in 1947 in July. written by Admiral Hillenkotter, whatever. Okay, there's a name on that. It's claimed to have been written by Hillenkotter. We'll take that one. Now I need to go to the web or to whatever archives and whatever's available, and I'm going to find some stuff written by Hillenkotter that nobody disputes, and I'm going to retype that, and that'll be my control sample against which I will test the unknown. So it had to have an author name, had to be long enough, at least 2 sentences. Some of the Majestic documents are less than 2 sentences and aren't even sentences, they're just outlines. Can't do anything with that. It had to have significant interest or content. What I mean by this is, again, I had to trim them, again, based upon financial considerations. Did the document say anything interesting about aliens or alien bodies or extraterrestrials or extraterrestrial technology? I wanted good ones. Okay, I wanted interesting ones. I wanted prose text, no outlines, no table of contents. I wanted primary, not secondary witnesses as author. I went after people who were there, okay, who were on the inside, like members of Majestic 12 or something like that. And I knew there was a known fraudulence factor. Stanton Friedman has done a lot of work doing his own checking on the Majestic documents. And if you go to his website, he has 7 there that he, to my satisfaction, has proven. He's proven that 7 of them are fakes. I threw a couple in and didn't tell Dr. Chasky I was doing it. I wanted to see if she'd catch them. So I put a couple in that I knew were bogus. That was my own little backup test. Here are the ones that I did, that I had tested. There are 9 authors. So you remember which button to push here, yes. FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Marshall, Hillenkotter, Twining, Vannevar Bush, and Dulles. These are the documents that I picked. Here, I believe they add up to 17. This is just word count, character count. I didn't know if that was important to Dr. Chasky or not. I don't know if it was, but I threw it in when I sent her the spreadsheet. So here are the documents. FDR to Marshall, FDR on non-terrestrial science. That's kind of a famous one. Truman to Twining, July 9th, 47. Truman to Forrestal, Eisenhower to Twining, Eisenhower to the Director of Central Intelligence, so on. You can read the list here. These are the ones that I selected. Here are the ones that I matched them against. In other words, I wanted to find a good set of control documents. I wanted to be sensitive to same length, same genre, like memo. I wanted to find memos. If it was longer, I wanted to find a longer letter. I wanted to try to be sensitive to matching sort of the genre category, the literary category. And these are the ones that I selected from. I have a bigger pool of these, but I tried to get a good number, again, matching word counts and character counts too. So for FDR, I had 5, Truman, I had 5, Eisenhower had 3, Kennedy had 3, Marshall had 4, Hillenkotter had 3, Twining, I was able to find 2, and a good long one, so that I could sort of match the White Hot report in terms of length, and it had similar content as well, technological discussion, that kind of thing. Vannevar Bush, some letters that he had written, and then Dulles, I found 2 knowns for him. Now here's what was done. We had the unknown, this is the known author, FDR. These are the ones that nobody disputes. So here's our FDR pool, as it were. Procedurally, computational stylistic comparisons were run between each pool. There's an FDR pool, there's a Hillenkotter pool, there's a Kennedy pool, there's a Dulles pool. She compared, I didn't know she was going to do this, and I didn't understand why at the time, but I do now. She took every pool, ran it through her program to get the stylistic patterns, and then she compared every known pool against all the other known pools. Now, why would she do that? Well, the result was a similarity score that assessed how similar the stylistic elements of the known documents were to the unverified. She wanted to, let me just back up here a second. Well, let's go forward here. She took all the known pools, compared them against each other, and then she took every known pool and compared them against every unknown. That's probably a better way to say it. The purpose of the step, actually this one and the last one, was to detect how similar one known document pool was to another known document pool, for the purpose of ranking how dissimilar each of the other known pools was to each other. Why is that important? One would assume that it would be obvious, it should be obvious, that the 9 known groups, the 9 known pools, are going to be radically different from each other because they're 9 authors we already know. They shouldn't have any evidence of being written by the same person, because we all know who they are. Nobody disputes the documents. So that should be sort of self-evident. But by obtaining similarity scores for all the known document pools when compared to each other, which really amount to dissimilarity scores, since one already knows they have different authors, one can see if the score for the known document pool of an author, say FDR, compared to the unverified document pool for FDR, is significantly better or more similar, as one would expect. In other words, let me try to put this in plain English. In other words, you would expect, if you had 9 unknown authors, you had 9 claims to authorship. There were 17 documents that I had tested, written by 9 different people. For each of those 9 different people, I had a pool of things that everybody knows that they wrote. You would think that all of those pools, compared to each other, they're going to be radically different. It would really be odd. It would really be odd if the pools that you know are going to be different were actually more similar to the unknown than the unknown's known pool was to that unknown document. Let's say myself and Guy Malone, and we'll throw in my wife. Okay, there's 3 of us. If we tested pools, document pools for my wife, myself, and Guy, well, of course, all 3 of those are going to be highly dissimilar. It would really be weird if an unknown document from me, something that someone said, you wrote that, Heiser, if that was actually more similar to like my wife's pool than it was to my own pool. That would really be strange. That would really be a mark that I did not write that thing. Okay, if there was a greater dissimilarity. So she compared everything against everything else. Then she ranked similarity scores. The similarity score of an unverified document was ranked to its corresponding known document pool, and that was ranked alongside the similarity scores of all the other nodes. In the rankings, and I'm going to show you the rankings here in a moment, the lowest numerical figure, and again, her program spits out numbers, it spits out this score. The lowest numerical figure represents the known document pool that was the most like the document being tested. Okay, so whichever group, she had all the groups, and she would put one in the top slot in her spreadsheet. This pool is the most like the style of this document being tested. In the following spreadsheet, this lowest number is listed in the top slot for each unverified document. The lowest similarity score, again, the lowest number, the score that occupies the top slot, identifies the real author in just under 91% of her validation tests. The bottom line, if the unverified document was genuine, and by genuine I mean if it was written by the person whose name is on it, one would expect its known document pool to occupy the first slot in the similarity score ranking. The circumstance would be a match. If the unverified matches the known pool, the known is in the first slot. Here's what we mean. Here are the test results.
I would call this podcast military and corporate psionic contact with NHI versus CE5 contact. What's the difference? What are the distinctions? And why are those distinctions important? And why we want to do CE5 contact and not a militaristic contact.
But there is a problem with the way those beings are described in this country. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been bombarded by a lot of marketing, very, very good marketing, to promote certain books and certain movies that introduced the idea that the beings were always 4 feet tall, were always bald and had big eyes. Well, that's one kind that has been described, but it's not the only kind. And many other kinds and it's interesting to speculate as to why the American public is being bombarded by that particular picture of an alien. There are lots of games being played behind the phenomenon itself. In other words, there is a real phenomenon, but there may be and here we're talking about the third level, the sociological level. If you could make people expect aliens, you could manipulate public opinion.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Initially, the Roswell incident consisted only of accounts of the recovery of a flying disc. In 1947, there were no claims of alien bodies associated with the Roswell incident. The recovery of alien bodies became part of the Roswell story during the late 1970s, with other claims being made in the 1980s and 1990s. These later-day revisions to the Roswell story were often based on anecdotal accounts from second- and third-hand witnesses collected by UFO enthusiasts 40 or more years after the actual event. The same anecdotal accounts that refer to bodies also describe large-scale field operations conducted by U.S. military personnel using an assortment of military vehicles and aircraft to recover crashed debris, supposedly from an extraterrestrial spaceship. Military personnel were allegedly led by an angry, red-headed captain, threatening those who witnessed the operation with imprisonment or death if they revealed what they observed. The popular Roswell story contends that the bodies, once recovered, were allegedly transported under tight security to the base hospital at Roswell Army Airfield for autopsy. At the hospital, the angry red-headed captain was again allegedly observed threatening civilians. Following the purported autopsies, the alien bodies were supposedly transported to Wright Field, Ohio, now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, for further processing and storage. This summarizes the Roswell incident scenario as presented by UFO enthusiasts. On the surface, this explanation may appear plausible to some. However, things are not always as they appear.
We don't summon and call or boss the ETs around. It's a diplomatic invitation. So let's get our linguistics down here. If you summon someone, you're at Downton Abbey, being the Earl of whatever, summoning the butler to bring you tea, right? We're not summoning ETs that way. We don't call them and they come at our beck and call. That is undiplomatic, it's demeaning, it's disrespectful, and it's the opposite of what we're doing with CE5 contact. That is not the consciousness behind it. The consciousness behind it is an invitation to make contact for peaceful relationship building between species, humans and non-human intelligence. It is not acquisitive. It's not to shoot them out of the sky with an electromagnetic pulse weapon, grab their technology, capture the living beings and put them under bases, or kill them. That operation is 180 degrees diametrically opposite of what CE5 contact teams are doing.
I think it should be studied by scientists. I think it should be, it's a very interesting time to do this kind of research, especially because we now see that there are many different hypotheses about it. It's not just that either it doesn't exist or it has to be extraterrestrial. There are many other hypotheses. And to me, the UFO phenomenon is, I don't have a solution, but to me, it's an opportunity to do some good science and perhaps to test some of our theories about physics. There are theories, for example, today in physics about the possibility of other dimensions beyond time and space. There's a theory called the string theory that speculates about 10 dimensions and not just 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time.
The reports of bodies were only briefly discussed in the 1994 Air Force report because the search for records from 1947, the year of the alleged incident, did not yield any data to support a 1947 claim of alien bodies. However, following the release of the 1994 report, additional research uncovered information which explains some of the claims of alien bodies associated with the Roswell incident. From the additional research, a second report was written which critically examined the anecdotal claims and descriptions of flying saucers, aliens, and reports of unusual Air Force activities in the New Mexico desert. This in-depth examination revealed that many of these claims were reasonably accurate descriptions of Air Force activities. Some of the claims that refer to bodies are most likely misperceptions by uninformed persons of unclassified and widely publicized Air Force scientific achievements of the 1950s. However, other descriptions of bodies appear to be exploitation of Air Force members killed or injured in the line of duty.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
In the left-hand column is the document being tested. This is FDR number 1. Remember, I had that spreadsheet up a few slides before, giving you the ones that I had tested. For FDR number 1, the FDR pool is down here in the 4th slot. The first slot is occupied by the JFK pool. What that means is that the JFK pool of documents, stylistically, is more similar to this document that claims to have been written by FDR than the ones FDR wrote. That's bad. Okay, if you're looking for a match, that's bad. What you're looking for is for the blue to be in this slot so that there's blue across the board. That's a match. FDR1 fails. FDR2 fails. Here are the documents if you want the names. Be sure I didn't skip one. Okay. This is colored for a reason. I will tell you what the reason is in a moment. Truman 1, way down here. Now, I shouldn't say way down there because that's not fair. Basically, if you're not in number 1, it's just not a match. And it's not necessarily, this is really awful. It would be better if it was 3. That isn't how the testing works. You either match or you don't. Truman 1 fails, Truman 2 fails, and here are the documents. Dwight D. Eisenhower 1 fails, but narrowly. You'll notice JFK is in red. Back here, JFK is in red. Back here, JFK is in red. We'll talk about that in a moment, too. Eisenhower 1 fails. Eisenhower 2 fails. JFK, we only tested one of those, failed. Marshall 1 fails. Marshall 2 fails. Hillenkotter 1 fails. Hillenkotter 2 fails. Hillenkotter 3 fails. Twining 1 fails. Twining 2 fails. Twining 3 is a hit. By Chasky's methods, this document is authentic. It was really written by Twining to General Shillip to the best of 21st century technological methods. Bush fails. Dulles fails. And I believe that's the end. Only one of the 17 Majestic documents tested can be considered to have been written by the person whose name they bear as author. This is only 17 of them. Keep that in mind. In 8 of the 17, the JFK document pool occupied the first slot. And when Dr. Chasky sent me the results by email, and we chatted on the phone, she goes, "This was really weird. I've never seen anything like that." That does not mean that JFK wrote them. Rather, here's what it does mean. These 8 documents had roughly the same degree of similarity to this pool, and it suggests, but it doesn't prove, that these 8 documents could have been produced by the same person. Doesn't prove it, but it hints at it. And her response was, we would need to do some more. She says, there's some things I can do to make that a little tighter, but it's like, pay me. And, she deserves it. I'm not taking anything from her. Let's go back here. Why do I have blue? Can anybody guess? Anybody really familiar with the Majestic documents could guess this. I think this is our first blue. Here's a blue, Truman 1. It's a blue, Marshall 2. Blue, Hillenkotter 3. blue, 22. These are the ones that Stan Friedman has established are fakes. She got all 4 of them. She did good. Now, comments on the results. Are UFOs to be consigned to mythology because of the test results? Is ufology a waste of time in terms of this research or in terms of you investing your time in it? No, that would be ridiculous to conclude. The genuineness of the UFO phenomenon, whatever its true nature might be, does not depend on the Majestic documents. I think we all know that. But for those who, might be disturbed by this, it doesn't depend on these documents. Stanton Friedman, again, he's already pegged 7 of them as fakes. Stan is an honest guy. And he'd be the first one to say it. And it's not like he and I agree on everything or interpretation. But it doesn't depend on these. More accurately, what you can say is that no one should base any arguments or conclusions about UFOs on the basis of these documents that I've had tested. That would be flawed thinking and flawed research. You're going to base conclusions based on these. You're just really on poor footing in terms of research. The documents say more about someone's will to deceive, in my view, or a desire to move people to a certain conclusion about UFOs than anything else. It doesn't invalidate UFOs as a phenomenon. It doesn't invalidate the question of whether there's extraterrestrial life. Those questions do not depend on the Majestic documents. The testing correlates Stanton Friedman's position on the fraudulence of certain Majestic documents. Friedman's work here has not been accepted by every ufologist. I'm on his side because we got the double whammy here. If you go to his website, he's done a lot of really, I think, good grunt work finding documents that were faked, and then words were changed, vocabulary was changed to convert them into a Majestic document, what we know now as one of the Majestic documents. Chasky's methods validate his conclusions. He's right on those documents. While the validity of the UFO phenomenon is not undermined by the results, documentary support for the alien explanation of UFOs and the alien explanation for Roswell is weakened. It is not invalidated, it's weakened. Why? Because a lot of the documents here that failed the test were among those that testified to bodies or said something specific about Roswell. Now there's lots of other documents that talk about Roswell. There's lots of other documents, well, not a lot that talk about bodies, but there are some. So again, you have to be precise in what we're saying and in the conclusions that you draw from it. It's weakened, but it's not invalidated. It's not overturned. Although more testing needs to be done, the results cast a pall on the Majestic material. But again, there's a lot of it that I didn't test. I didn't test documents that don't have author names. I couldn't. Now, there are ways you can get at them. We'll talk about that here. Future prospects. I would say that where this is helpful in ufology is I'm hoping it will encourage people to focus on more reliable evidence. There's a lot of serious researchers in UFO studies that really do it for a living or do it, really full time, even if they have other jobs. I'm not one of those. Okay, we know who those people are. And if this helps them zero in on better cases, things that are really more fruitful, great. Okay, don't waste your time on things that just don't survive modern testing. Additional testing, and that is to move from 90% up to the 95 range that Chasky works in regularly. That's just a matter of being able to afford it. And this was a self-funded operation. This is not cheap. This is how Chasky earns her living, and she has every right to do it. She earned her PhD. She's earned her keep in the field. She's a leader among the field. And if you want more done, if I want more done, I need to raise the money. Okay, I am not a full-time ufologist. I wanted to know. Okay, now Dr. Chasky told me something halfway through the process that I did not know. She said, when you asked me to do this, the reason I accepted it so quickly was that I had seen it before. She had been approached by Robert Wood and Ryan Wood to do the same thing 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, "You're kidding." She said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Why didn't you do it?" She said, "They just lost interest. They backed away from it. I don't know why, and Mike, I don't know why either." It wasn't that expensive. I mean, I took a little hit, okay? I'm not going to spend any more of my own money on it. I want to know that what I need is 500 people to buy the preliminary report. I have a show Thursday, July 12th on Coast to Coast AM. This is going to be one of the topics of the show. And if I can't get 500 people to care to raise the money for all the rest of the stuff that she can do, then to me that says something. That means I move on to something else. I'm still going to be interested. I'll do other UFO kind of things I'm interested in, but I can't afford any more. So if there ain't 500 people that care, I guess they're not important. But then the researchers ought to quit talking about them. Okay? I think a no-nonsense approach to this. It's put up or shut up. You're going to say that we want science applied to UFO studies, well, then let's do it. You don't want it done, then quit talking about it. And, I'm interested. I want to be able for her to just do everything she can do. So hopefully that'll be the result. If she gets to do that by applying more testing results, here's some of the stuff she could do. Now, if you discover, if she does all the full battery of testing on every document that has an author, there were a few that, I excluded, based upon the reasons that I gave you. First thing I'd ask you to do is, let's get everything that has an author, run all the tests on that, run everything you have, throw everything you've got, these 17 plus the other stragglers, and then when you have a very sophisticated body of stylistic patterns, then what I want you to do is I want you to run those patterns against the stuff that doesn't have an author and see what hits, what matches, and what doesn't. And that doesn't mean necessarily, it could mean that, here's this anonymous document, we don't know who wrote it. Hillenkotter wrote it. That would help, UFO historians like Rich Dolan, okay? Because now you know with a high degree of certainty who wrote that thing. And you can situate it historically. It'll also turn up things like, hey, no, wait, we had these 8 that were similar. Here's like 10 more. And I wonder whose doorstep those documents showed up on. We might want to ask that person about where he or she got the documents in the first place, because it doesn't look good. That's the kind of thing you can do, even with stuff that doesn't have an author name. But that takes hours and hours of computer time, hours and hours of validation tests, and like I said, she's not cheap. So that's where I want to go with it. I don't know if that'll ever happen. If you want the report, this is the only place you can get it. And I didn't bring any with me. Why? Because I want to find 500 people who care. I don't want to hand it out so that you can hand it to all your friends. I want to find 500 people who care. I get 500 people who will pay $11.95, and it'll get done. All of it. So this is where you go. You go to my website. This is what I'm going to tell the Coast to Coast people. I'm going to be honest. Look, I'm not going to Tahiti. Okay? You won't find me in Tahiti. You will find me writing checks to Dr. Carol Chasky to do the rest of it. I'll leave this up, but that's all I have.
The following are the 5 main conclusions contained in the second report. Research reveals that actual U.S. military operations, widely separated by time, geographical location, and purpose, have been misinterpreted or deliberately misrepresented. These misrepresentations collectively created what is known as the Roswell incident. UFO proponents failed to establish accurate dates of reported eyewitness accounts, in some instances by more than a decade. In addition, they erroneously linked all these accounts to the actual 1947 recovery of Project Mogul equipment. Eventually, these misrepresentations transformed a series of verifiable Air Force activities into what some have described as the extraterrestrial event of the millennium. Reports of aliens in the New Mexico desert were actually anthropomorphic test dummies that were carried aloft by Air Force high-altitude research balloons. Critical examination of alleged alien sightings consistently matched the physical characteristics of these dummies, as well as where and how they were used.
Vince, that new dummy cam is great. Yeah, it'll sure give people a whole new outlook on what it's like when you don't wear a safety belt.
But during the 1950s, public awareness was still decades away for these important scientific tools. From 1953 to 1959, anthropomorphic dummies were used by the U.S. Air Force Aeromedical Laboratory in projects High Dive and Excelsior. The project's main objective was to study methods for returning a pilot or astronaut safely to Earth by parachute if forced to eject at extremely high altitudes. For these tests, dummies were transported up to 98,000 feet by high-altitude balloons. The dummies were released for a freefall period, during which body movements and escape equipment performance were recorded by a variety of instruments. Many of the dummies landed outside the confines of military reservations and were regularly observed by local civilians. Following a series of dummy tests, a human subject, Air Force test pilot Captain Joseph W. Kittinger Jr., now a retired colonel, made 3 bailouts from high-altitude balloons. These and other aeromedical projects that used both dummies and human test subjects were unclassified and widely publicized in the press and other media. In 1956, 20th Century Fox released On the Threshold of Space, a feature-length motion picture based on these projects and filmed on location at Holloman Air Force Base. Air Force personnel, aircraft, high-altitude balloons, and other equipment, including the actual anthropomorphic dummies, were used in the making of this film. The eyewitness reports of military units that always seemed to arrive shortly after the alleged crash of a flying saucer were actually accurate descriptions of Air Force personnel engaged in high-altitude balloon and anthropomorphic dummy recovery operations. Since 1947, Air Force atmospheric research organizations at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico, have launched and recovered approximately 2,500 high-altitude balloons, many in the same areas of New Mexico where the Roswell incident allegedly occurred. Additionally, the equipment, vehicles, and procedures used by the Holloman Air Force Base Balloon Branch, the unit that conducted most of the launches, are the same as that described by the reputed witnesses who claimed they saw the recovery of the flying saucer and alien crew. These huge Air Force high-altitude balloons, launched by the Holloman Balloon Branch, carried aloft a wide range of sophisticated and, from most perspectives, odd-looking devices. Much of this equipment was experimental and represented for that era the latest in space-age technologies. Payloads ranged from simple radio transmitters to sophisticated satellite components and NASA space probes. In fact, qualification trials for the NASA Voyager Mars and Viking space probes were flown by Air Force high-altitude balloons during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Ironically, these balloons were launched from the former Roswell Army Airfield, site of the originally alleged 1947 incident, and recovered on the White Sands Missile Range over 100 miles to the west. Recovering the balloon payloads was essential for accomplishing the scientific objectives of the high-altitude balloon program. The primary high-altitude balloon recovery areas were and still are located at predetermined sites throughout Arizona, West Texas, and New Mexico, including the area surrounding Roswell. To retrieve the equipment many miles from Holloman Air Force Base, recovery personnel operated a variety of aircraft and vehicles. The exact vehicles described by the witnesses as having been present at the crashed flying saucer sites. To expedite these operations, the recovery crews tracked the balloons optically, electronically, and from aircraft, which directed ground vehicles to the impact areas. In several of the Roswell accounts, unsubstantiated allegations asserted that military personnel who retrieved equipment from rural areas of New Mexico intimidated and threatened civilians on the scene. On the contrary, Balloon Branch personnel enjoyed good relations with the local community and often solicited their assistance following a balloon or payload landing. In the course of their activities, recovery personnel rented or borrowed tractors, bulldozers, snowmobiles, and even pack mules from local residents. The payloads, parachutes, balloons, and circling chase aircraft often draw crowds of curious onlookers from the local community. In fact, so many civilians are often present at balloon or payload landing sites, the scenes were once described by Balloon Branch personnel as being like the circus coming to town. In addition to high-altitude balloons, the Holloman Balloon Branch also launched low-altitude tethered balloons. These tethered balloons may have inspired at least one account of an alien craft associated with the Roswell incident. In a popular book, the authors present a drawing of a crashed spaceship, allegedly given to them by an anonymous witness. When this drawing is compared to a photograph of an experimental tethered balloon flown at Holloman Air Force Base in March 1965, the similarities are undeniable. The red-headed captain was probably Captain Joseph W. Kittinger, Jr. Captain Kittinger served as the project officer or pilot in all three of the Air Force's manned high-altitude balloon projects, Man High, Excelsior, and Stargazer. Captain Kittinger was present at many balloon and dummy launch and recovery sites throughout the southwest United States during the 1950s and early 1960s. However, other than the allegations made by UFO proponents, there is no evidence of any kind that Kittinger confronted or threatened civilians. Colonel Kittinger's achievements as an Air Force test pilot are legendary. He has the standing world record parachute jump from nearly 20 miles. Later, he went on to serve 3 combat tours in Southeast Asia and is credited with an aerial victory while engaged in combat over North Vietnam. After over 480 combat missions, Colonel Kittinger was shot down over North Vietnam and spent 10 months as a prisoner of war in the infamous Hanoi Hilton before being repatriated in March 1973. Colonel Kittinger made history again after retiring from the Air Force. In 1984, he accomplished the first solo crossing of the Atlantic by balloon. The final and most disturbing conclusion of the second Roswell report is the apparent exploitation of Air Force members killed or injured in the line of duty to perpetuate the alleged sightings of alien bodies. Claims of bodies at the Roswell Army Airfield Hospital were likely a combination of several aircraft accidents and an unusual manned balloon mishap. One aircraft accident occurred on June 26, 1956. 11 Air Force members died when their fully loaded KC-97 tanker aircraft experienced a propeller failure 4.5 minutes after takeoff. The crash site was approximately 9 miles south of the former Roswell Army Airfield, renamed Walker Air Force Base in 1948. The badly burned bodies of the 11 crewmen were identified and processed at the Walker Air Force Base Hospital. The alleged claims of bodies at the base hospital can be traced to a single witness whose descriptions closely matched the condition and the circumstances under which these victims were identified. Furthermore, claims of bodies attributed to specific Air Force personnel are unsubstantiated. Some of these individuals were not even present at Roswell Army Airfield in July 1947. The balloon mishap occurred during a low-level training mission for backup pilots in the Project Excelsior high-altitude manned balloon program. This unusual accident occurred approximately 10 miles northwest of Walker Air Force Base on May 21, 1959. One of the three crewmen, Captain Dan D. Fulgham, now a retired colonel, was injured during landing. Following the mishap, Captain Fulgham and the other balloon crew members were transported to the Walker Air Force Base Hospital via a chase helicopter that followed the training mission for emergency purposes. Upon arrival at the highly secure Strategic Air Command base, the balloon crew was met by armed Air Force security personnel who remained with the crew until their identities were confirmed. As the Excelsior project officer and instructor pilot for this mission, the red-headed Captain Kittinger accompanied the balloon crew to the hospital. At the Walker Air Force Base Hospital, Kittinger and Fulgham were apparently observed by individuals who later related this unusual incident. Elements of this actual event now appear to be part of the Roswell story. Captain Fulgham was treated for an injury that caused his head to swell beyond its normal size. The injury, described as a traumatic hematoma, was not serious. On a specially arranged flight several days after the accident, Fulgham returned to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, where he made a complete recovery. Fulgham went on to distinguish himself as a test parachutist and physiologist for the space program. He later flew F-4s in Southeast Asia, adding to his combat record as a fighter pilot during the Korean War. When critically examined, the Roswell incident is exposed as a conglomeration of many events, including aircraft accidents, that occurred over several decades. Misidentification of anthropomorphic dummies and experimental balloon-launched devices, combined with Air Force balloon operations portrayed as mysterious flying saucer and alien recovery teams, transformed verifiable events into what is now known as the Roswell incident.
I mean, there are moments when you are moved to do things that are much better than you actually are, and that are also more evil and destructive than you actually are. You are subject to forces from outside yourself. That is absolutely true. Now, we can argue about what they are, but every person in the room, if he's reflective, will tell you, yes, I know what you're talking about. And so there are forces that are not human, that do exist in a spiritual realm of some kind, that we cannot see.
So this is a Pentagon. This is a Department of Defense official saying, stop looking at UFOs because they're demonic.
Correct.
Well, there you have it. Hopefully you're a little more educated on the subject than you was when you got here. And if you got something out of this video, then consider giving a little thumbs up. If you're not already, maybe hit that subscribe button. That way you can join us next time for our next Fan Edit or any of the other videos we got here on this channel. I know your time is valuable, and I surely do appreciate you spending it here with me. And until that next time, remember, Yeshua, Jesus loves you. So do I. Now get off of here, go ride your bike, and read your Bible.